So I want to talk a little bit about Git and GitHub and what the differences are and different sort of philosophies about how and why we would use Git. So Git is a version control software. It allows you to keep track of software as it changes. All software is really a living thing in a sense that you are changing it and working with it and modifying it and building on it as the process goes along. And what you have is not just a final product, a final outcome, but what you have is really a long process. And what Git does is it emphasizes the process aspect of coding. And I think that's really important for us to be working on at this point in our development. So Git is really something that happens on your computer. GitHub is a separate website, which is sort of a central place for a lot of Git repositories. And so a repository is a project. So you'll create a repository for your Django code. If you do another project after that, you'll create a new repository for that. And you'll organize all of your thought process and all of your work on that project as you go in your Git repositories. So each project will get its own repository. You'll connect that to a repository on GitHub, which is literally a hub for people's Git repositories. And that way I and other classmates will be able to take a look at what you're doing in your project, and you'll be able to look at each other's work and think about how what somebody else is doing relates to what you're trying to do and make that an easier process. You should think about using Git sort of the way that you think about commenting your code when you're doing it right, which I know not everybody does that. A lot of people are throwing in comments at the end sort of because they have to, not because they find it useful. But I think it's pretty important to put in comments as you go. So what Git allows you to do is examine the process. So what comments are great at is explaining the final outcome. And so when you look at your code, you can see where you ended up. You have all the comments that describe what it is that you have in all the different places and how they relate to each other. And that's really useful. It's all what you get out of comments. However, what Git allows you to do is to say, here's my process. This is how I got to that endpoint. So you can track all the changes that you go through. You also have the opportunity to revert if things go badly. And so if you corrupt your database and you make a mess of things and you can't get things to work, then you can back up 3 steps or 5 steps or 2 steps and go back to something that was working well quite easily with Git in a way that's not possible with the standard sort of what we call destructive editing, where every change you make gets rid of what was before it. Git allows you to do sort of a version of non-destructive editing where you're keeping what was there and then creating a new version of it later. The basic unit of a Git repository is what's called a commit. And each commit is literally that. It's a commitment. You've decided that this is some code that you think at this point works. You've tested it a little bit and it seems to be okay. And you're going to add it to your project, to your repository. And then you commit it to the repository, and then the repository sets that as a step in your process. So how often should you commit? Pretty often at this point. It's sort of like when you're learning software development in the beginning, you want to comment basically everything. Why do you want to comment basically everything? Because you want to show that you understand it. That's your job. And it's the same thing with Git here. You're creating a new repository, going through a new process. It's better to over commit in this case than it is to under commit. You want to commit often and make small commits that are small changes and have a long list of commits.